What happens when a top U.S. official looks straight into the camera and refuses to say he'll follow the law? In a tense congressional hearing, Secretary Pete Hegseth was pressed on two explosive issues: whether he'd bomb Iran without a direct attack, and whether he'd obey a federal court order on deploying troops inside American cities. His answers? Dodges, deflections, and a chilling signal that the administration wants the power to act without judicial limits. This isn't just political theater, it's a test of how far executive authority can stretch before democracy itself starts to crack. It started when Congressman Ro Khanna went straight for the foreign policy jugular. He wanted a clear, simple commitment: no war with Iran unless the United States is directly attacked.
Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Khanna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I'm hoping we can start where we may have common ground: no war in Iran. In 2016, President Trump was one of the few people on the Republican stage to have the guts to say that George W. Bush's war in Iraq was an utter disaster. He promised the American people no endless wars. Tucker Carlson has said that thousands of Americans will die if there's a war in Iran. He is cautioning that currently neocons are trying to get President Trump into a war in Iran. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has said the American people don't want to bomb Iran. Will you today assure the American people and the MAGA movement that you will not bomb Iran unless we are hit?
Congressman, it's good to hear you quoting conservatives.
When they're right, I quote them.
I will tell you this: the president has been earnestly and completely committed to a peace process, has given Iran every opportunity, those talks ongoing, but he also fully recognizes the threat that Iran with a nuclear weapon would exist.
Will you commit to us not bombing them? I mean, that's what the conservative MAGA movement is calling for. It online, you'll see. I mean, they want a commitment that we not bomb Iran unless we're directly hit.
Well, here in this forum, it wouldn't be prudent for me to commit or not to commit. My job is to be postured and prepared in the region, just as the chairman.
How about this?
For any potential capability.
Would you agree with this analysis that Netanyahu is itching for a fight? If Netanyahu uses American missiles to hit Iran, he's going to drag us into a war there because Iran's going to say they're using American missiles. Our military knows that you cannot just through hits eliminate Iran's nuclear capability. They'll simply go underground, and they will then end monitoring. And unlike Iraq, they're in heavily civilian sites. Will you stand up today and make it clear to Netanyahu that that escalation, what he's threatening just yesterday, is not in the American interest, that he should not be dragging America into war with Iran?
Well, Congressman, that question included a lot of speculation. What I know is that Bibi Netanyahu is going to put his country first, and we're going to put our country first, and we're positioned properly in the region to ensure that we're prepared for any potential contingency.
Are you concerned about his escalation into Iran, and will you assure the American people you're going to do everything possible to keep us out of a war in Iran?
We remain, as the president has said, committed to creating the conditions for peace, creating the conditions for talks where Iran does not have the ability to develop a nuclear weapon.
I'm running out of time, 2 minutes, so let me ask you another matter. Senator Baldwin asked you about the legal authority for the Marines in my state. I disagree with you. I thought not only do I not want Marines in Iran, I don't want them in California.
Khanna reminded everyone that even Donald Trump back in 2016 had promised to end the cycle of endless wars. Tucker Carlson himself had warned that thousands of Americans could die if the U.S. got dragged into a conflict with Iran. Even far-right firebrand Marjorie Taylor Greene had publicly said the American people don't want to bomb Iran. So this wasn't a partisan trick question, it was a moment to reassure the public across the political spectrum. But when Khanna asked if Hegseth could give that promise, the answer wasn't yes and it wasn't no. Instead, Hegseth praised Trump's so-called peace process, insisted Iran had been given every chance to cooperate, and shifted the focus to the threat posed by a nuclear-armed Iran. It was a carefully packaged non-answer. And in that silence you could hear the message loud and clear: the option to launch a strike stays on the table no matter what the public wants. Khanna didn't stop there. He raised the issue of Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, pointing out that Netanyahu's recent rhetoric made it sound like he was itching for a confrontation with Iran. Khanna warned that if Netanyahu struck Iran using American missiles, Tehran would see that as an attack from the United States itself, almost guaranteeing that America would be pulled into war. He pressed Hegseth to say right then and there that such an escalation was not in America's interest. Again, Hegseth sidestepped. He said Netanyahu will put his country first and the U.S. will put its own country first, and that the military is positioned to be prepared for any contingency. Translation: no commitment, no pushback, and no reassurance that America won't be dragged into another Middle Eastern conflict. Then the hearing shifted from foreign policy to something even closer to home, literally. Khanna brought up the administration's legal battle over whether Marines should be deployed in Los Angeles. The question was straightforward: if a federal court rules against you, will you obey the order? This is where the temperature in the room seemed to rise. Hegseth refused to give a direct answer. Instead, he argued that local judges shouldn't be making national security decisions for the country. That's not just a refusal to commit, it's a hint that the administration might be willing to defy court rulings it doesn't like. Khanna tried again, pointing out that in America, it's not the president's personal legal opinion or the secretary's opinion that matters, it's the court's. He asked whether Hegseth would at least commit to respecting a Supreme Court ruling on the matter. Still not yes, no. Instead, Hegseth doubled down on the idea that local district judges shouldn't be influencing foreign or national security policy. The subtext: if a court says no, the administration wants the option to say, we're doing it anyway. And that's where the bigger picture comes into focus. This isn't just about Iran. It's not just about one city or one troop deployment. It's about a pattern, a strategy of keeping every option open, even if that means bending or outright ignoring the checks and balances built into the Constitution. By refusing to commit on both questions, Hegseth signaled that this administration sees the courts not as a co-equal branch of government, but as an obstacle to get around when convenient. Think about the implications. On one hand, they won't promise not to start a war unless the country is attacked. On the other hand, they won't promise to follow the courts if the courts tell them to stop a domestic military deployment. That's a dangerous combination: unchecked military decisions abroad and unchecked military presence at home. The very idea of civilian oversight, whether through Congress, the courts, or public opinion, starts to look like window dressing if the executive branch can simply shrug it off. And when it comes to Netanyahu, the dodge is even more telling. By refusing to warn Israel against escalating tensions with Iran, the administration keeps its hands free. If Netanyahu makes the first move, the U.S. could claim it's just responding to an ally's needs. But in reality, it's a clever way to slide into a war without ever having to admit that it was the plan all along. This is where history offers a warning. Once a president or their administration starts claiming national security as the reason to bypass judicial limits, it rarely stops there. We've seen emergency powers justified for short-term crises that quietly become permanent fixtures. What's being tested here is whether the public will accept it, whether we'll shrug off a Secretary of Defense refusing to commit to the rule of law because he frames it as being prepared or protecting us. And here's the truth: once you accept that the government can pick and choose which court orders to follow, the foundation of the entire system starts to crack. The Constitution doesn't work on trust. It works on limits, limits that apply to everyone, no matter how urgent they claim the situation is. If the administration can deploy troops on American soil without court approval, and if it can launch strikes overseas without a direct attack, then the barrier between national defense and unchecked executive power becomes paper thin. What makes this hearing so revealing is how open it all was. There was no behind closed doors plotting, no leaked memo to interpret, just direct questions in public and direct refusals to answer them. It's the kind of moment that should have every American asking where the line is and what happens if that line keeps moving. Some might argue that in a dangerous world, leaders need flexibility, that committing in advance to not bomb Iran could embolden enemies, that following a court order in a crisis could slow down a needed response. But the danger in that thinking is that it assumes the government will always use its power wisely. History, both American and global, suggests otherwise. Once a power is taken, it's almost never given back willingly. And that's why this matters far beyond the headlines. The issues raised here aren't just about Iran, Israel, or Los Angeles. They're about whether the people we elect and the officials they appoint are still bound by the same laws and limits as everyone else. If the answer is no, if they can set aside the courts whenever they feel like it, then we've crossed into something very different from the system we're supposed to have. The most unsettling part is that this isn't happening with loud declarations or dramatic speeches. It's happening quietly, in the form of polite but deliberate refusals to commit to the basic principle that no one is above the law. That's how norms erode, not with a bang but with a series of shrugs. So the next time you hear a politician talk about keeping America safe, listen closely to what they're not saying. Safety is important, but so is the system that keeps power from being abused. And if the choice is between absolute security and absolute power, history tells us the people in charge will always choose the latter, unless we make it clear that's not an option. What do you think? Should a top U.S. official be able to ignore the courts in the name of national security, and should we ever go to war without a direct attack? Let us know in the comments, and if you found this breakdown eye-opening, make sure to subscribe because the next story we're covering is even more controversial.